Hello and welcome to Sam Not So Wise. My name is Sam. Today I have episode 2 of Short but Substantial Works for You. Now this is a video series in which I talk about those tinier books which still have a lot of content, a lot of richness to them, because we read a lot of big thick books in the sci-fi and fantasy communities, so sometimes it's nice to pick up something smaller, something more digestible, but which still has a lot of essence within the short page counts. Now it's been a while since episode 1 because of life. I'll put a link to the first one in the description, but the idea of this series is I talk about 2 bodies of work within a video, either a book or a collection of books by an author. Today I'm going to be talking about Ken Liu's Paper Menagerie, focusing on a few stories but talking about it in general as well, and this is how you lose the Time War. So with much further ado, let's talk about those little stories that pack a punch. So first up, I want to talk about Ken Liu's The Paper Menagerie and Other Stories. Now yes, I know, this is 450 pages long. Samuel, that is not short, but it's a collection of short stories. 15 in total, including 2 novellas. And I would recommend you do what I did and use this as a bunch of palate cleansers between big stories or whilst you're reading something very heavy. I think I read 3 books whilst I was reading this collection in December, and it really just helped when I wanted a break from, you know, Wind and Truth or a big sci-fi book. They were really helpful to just break that up nicely. Now, short stories aren't normally my thing. I don't historically get on with short stories and short story collections. So I was a little bit nervous going into this book, but I needn't have been worried because this was an excellent collection and I felt deepness within the stories that I haven't with other short story collections in the past. So I highly recommend this collection. Now, obviously some of the stories I preferred to others, but most of them made me feel something, which is what I'm looking for when I'm reading a book. Now, I really enjoyed the great variety of the stories within this collection. You have stories that are kind of really insane sci-fi concepts, and then to more relatable tech concepts like near future sci-fi. We have things that are kind of mythological in nature, and then we have a bunch of magic realism, whatever that means. By the way, when I do my dissertation in a few years, I'm considering doing it on magic realism, what it is and whether it is fantasy. Do you think I should do that? I mean, there's a long time until I have to decide, but let me know your thoughts. Prose. This is the first work I've read by Ken Liu, and I was very impressed by his prose. I am no prose expert, but I love how he really fit the prose to the story that he was telling, you know, depending on the story he was telling. But when it wasn't of like hard sci-fi nature, I found it often to be very lyrical and beautiful without being purple. So I was very impressed by the prose. Now this collection of stories is absolutely jam-packed full of thematic work. It's clearly highly important for Liu and his writing. All of his stories are highly theme-driven and explored beautifully. Now, obviously, each story has its own kind of theme that it wants to explore, but there are some overarching themes throughout the stories, you know, themes that are present more than once or more than twice, many times. And those are things such as cross-culturalism, the loss of culture, importance of close relations, and how history affects societies. So I just want to highlight 3 of my favorites from this collection. There are a bunch I could have talked about, but these are the ones I'm choosing. I'm just going to say there may be some light spoilers because it is very hard to talk about a short story without basically telling you what the story is about, if you know what I mean. But I won't tell you how the stories end or anything, but if you're super sensitive to spoilers and you're going to read this very soon, then maybe skip ahead to the next part of the video. But first I will talk about Literomancer. This is a story about an American girl in Taiwan in like the 60s in the Cold War era, and she's a daughter to a high up official. She befriends an old Taiwanese man and a young boy that lives with him, and they kind of just share stories with each other and share cultures with each other. The girl accidentally lets something slip to her father and events take a bad turn, shall we say. Now, this story is all about the brutality of the Cold War, kindness to strangers, transcending cultural boundaries, and the innocence of youth. It was beautiful and it was emotional, and it really packed a punch. Next, I must mention the titular story, the Paper Menagerie. A Chinese woman is bought as a wife to an American man, and they have a son in America. She struggles learning English and adjusting to the culture of American life, and local society basically rejects her. She loves her son more than anything, and she makes him origami animals that she blows life into, and they become animate. Eventually, the son rejects his Chinese heritage. He just wants to be an American, and this leads to a deterioration of relationship, and things go from there. Now, honestly, this is a very sad story, and it's about the difficulty of adjusting to a new culture, othering and alienation of those who are different to you, but also loss of culture through generations. It was beautiful but sad, and I was tearing up while I was reading it in a car on the way to a family event. And this one will definitely live in my memory because it is amazing. Now, a lot of the stories within this collection are quite sad, but not the next one I want to talk about, which is called All the Flavors. This is a charming story about Chinese immigrants in Idaho in the mid-1800s, which is based upon real events, which I find fascinating. This story doesn't really have much of a plot. It's a small town community dynamics kind of story where a bunch of Chinese immigrants start integrating themselves into a town in Idaho, and that is basically the story. So whilst the locals are originally suspicious of these Chinese immigrants, we see them grow to first accept them and then embrace them as their new neighbours and friends. It is interspersed with some wildly told historical events in China from one of the main Chinese characters. And that's about all I can really say about the story. It's not sad, it is very happy and charming, and apart from mentions of exploitation of Chinese workers, the themes are very heartwarming as well, which are to do with building of community, embracing differences and change, and extending the hand of friendship. It was a really beautiful and fun little story that I highly recommend you read. The next and final book I want to talk about in this video is This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Motar and Max Gladstone. Now, this book won a lot of awards, all of the big ones as well as some of the minor ones, and it was in the novella category. Now, I am slightly confused because this book is 208 pages long, which I would consider a novel. A short one, yes, but a novel. I've read other books that are shorter than this and were considered novels. Now, granted, they are kind of quite a bit older, so I'm wondering if the definition of novella has changed over time. Let me know your thoughts on that. But the takeaway is it's quite short, just over 200 pages long. So the story is about two agents on the opposite sides of, you guessed it, a time war. Now, these sides obviously have differing opinions on how the timeline should ultimately look and work through time and space to thwart each other and try and end this seemingly endless war to their benefit. Now, these agents start sending each other letters through space and time, which is against the rules, by the way. Now, this begins in a taunting manner, obviously, as they are on opposite sides of a war. But they soon learn that they have a lot in common with each other and start to learn respect for each other, which blossoms into friendship, which eventually leads into a relationship. So this book is essentially a romance novel, which is a little bit surprising for me because I don't read romance. Nothing against it, it's just not my bag. Don't mind some romance like with any book as long as it's done well, but I don't choose romance books. But I really enjoyed this and it has so much packed into it. Obviously, this has some large sci-fi concepts considering it is a time travel story. We go through crazy amounts of time, large swathes. I don't know, swaths of time. And the world building is quite crazy. We go to a lot of different worlds. It could potentially be confusing as we travel through this timeline, but it is done very well and is ultimately easy enough to follow. And this world building kind of acts as a backdrop to the relationship and the story. It's not the main focus, but there is a lot there for people who love large sci-fi concepts. Now, I also really enjoyed the storytelling style. So we have the letters to each other, which is an epistolary format, of course, but the manner in which they send each other letters is really entertaining. It's not just writing on a piece of paper to each other. There are all sorts of very imaginative ways that they read their letters to each other. And you just kind of have to find that out for yourself by reading it, but it is extremely imaginative. But also between these letters, we get some kind of normal narrative as well, sections between a writing or a reading of a letter, a little bit of narrative, and then that repeats through the story. So it is a really fun storytelling structure. Now the prose, it is very varied throughout the 200 odd pages in style. So it goes from formal at the start, as you would expect in kind of a formal letter, and then the informality increases as the relationship develops, and eventually we get large passages of truly poetic and basically romantic writing to each other as they fall in love with each other. But some of this poetic writing is extremely beautiful, so there's a large range of prose within the 200 odd pages, which is impressive. I also must note that there is a good amount of humour within this book. A lot of that has to do with how they send each other letters. It's very, like I said, very imaginative. It's very fun, and they kind of send each other jokes through the timeline. So that is something to look out for as well. Now the themes are obviously kind of largely revolving around those of relationships. So such as love in the face of diversity, you know, because they're not really supposed to be talking to each other, and determination to, you know, go through with what they really want and try and show each other the love that they want to. There are, you know, bigger, larger, grander ideals that we talk about in the themes as well, whether the one side that wants to take a more natural approach to the world and how they see it versus a more industrial side. But again, that's kind of just a backdrop to the story, but you can find those themes there as well. In conclusion, this packs a lot of work into 200 pages. It's full of excitement and romance and sci-fi ideas, and you will probably just absolutely fly through it in a day or two because it is exciting, but it is full of lovely, yummy wonderfulness. And even if you're not a fan of romance like me, I think you'll find a lot entertaining and you'll get a lot from this short book. So that's the end of the video today. As I always say, if you've made it this far into the video, I thank you so much. I appreciate it a lot. Let me know if you've read any of the 2 books that I've talked about today. I'd like to hear your opinions and any more recommendations for short but impactful stories. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing, like the video if you liked it, and I think that is it for today. So I'll see you in another video in about a week's time. Goodbye.